Giselle Rosevin was never meant to live long. She was the infamous Wicked Witch, fated to be imprisoned and executed. But fate must have gotten bored, because this Villainess's story took an unexpected turn the moment her would-be assassin showed up. When the latest assassin arrived to poison her, Giselle surprised him by asking, "Did you bring the poison?" "Good. Hand it over." The assassin hesitated. That hesitation was his first mistake. Giselle snatched the bottle and downed the entire thing in one gulp. "Strawberry milk?" she mused. The mercenary's second mistake. Checking the bottle himself. Seconds later, he was coughing up blood, collapsing at her feet. Another one bites the dust. In her past life, Giselle had been an exhausted office worker who escaped reality by reading novels during breaks. The poisoned apple was one of her favorites, or at least it used to be, before she woke up inside it. The story was infamous for its cruelty. Heroes died, villains died, everyone died. Giselle, as a minor villainess, was among the first to go, poisoned in her cell before her execution. So imagine her surprise when she got hit by a car one night and woke up as that doomed villainess, already imprisoned and moments away from her literally death. The first assassin wasted no time handing her a bottle of instant death. Unfortunately for him, it tasted more like strawberry-flavored cough syrup, and Giselle didn't even feel queasy. The poor man, thinking he'd grabbed the wrong poison, tested a drop himself. His body hit the ground faster than her brain could process what just happened. After that, it became a bizarre pattern. Assassins came, poisons were served, and one by one, they all fell victim to their own concoctions. Giselle couldn't help but wonder, were all the assassins in this world idiots? At first, she was too scared to drink the poisons, so she struggled. But the longer she survived, the more desensitized she became. She even started rating the poisons by different flavors. Apple yogurt? A bit too artificial, but not bad. Probably because, poison. Yet no matter what they gave her, none of it worked. Eventually, even the guards stopped caring. At first, they panicked, thinking Giselle had killed her attackers. But after realizing the assassins had essentially offed themselves, they shrugged and went back to their duties. Apparently, villainous or not, she wasn't worth the trouble. Still, Giselle suspected that the reason so many assassins got through wasn't incompetence. It was bribery. The guards were being paid to turn a blind eye. Even as a minor villainess, she couldn't catch a break. But survival wasn't freedom. No matter how many assassins dropped dead in front of her, she was still trapped, waiting for her execution day. On one cold night, Giselle let out a quiet sigh, hoping the next poison she had to drink would at least taste good. Maybe then it would leave her in a better mood. Then out of nowhere, a laugh echoed through the darkness of her cell, as if someone had just heard the most entertaining thing in the world. For a moment, Giselle thinks that maybe all the poison had finally gotten to her head. After all, anyone who'd spent days chugging poison like water was bound to start hearing voices eventually. Maybe this was her brain's way of waving a white flag. But the laughter didn't stop. "Ghosts?" she hissed, looking around frantically. To her horror, or maybe relief, a calm voice answered from the shadows. "No, I'm not a ghost." Well, a real person was arguably better than a haunting, though the attitude in that voice left much to be desired. Giselle rolled her eyes, muttering that whoever he was, she assumed he was just another assassin testing his luck. She warned him flatly that she'd just downed some poison earlier and needed a few minutes to let it digest. The man only laughed again. Then, he conjured a small vial out of thin air and floated it toward her through some kind of magic. "Try this one," he said playfully. Giselle snapped back. "I said wait. What do I look like to you, a lab rat?" Even without tasting it, she could tell from the sour, almost chemical smell that it wasn't pleasant. Spoiled poison. Now that might finally kill her. And yet, she found herself curious. After surviving countless attempts, the odds were oddly in her favor. Still, being stabbed was a different matter. She wasn't immortal, just ridiculously hard to poison. Besides, she was still waiting for execution. If she was going to die anyway, she might as well bargain for something in return. So she did what any desperate, slightly unhinged woman would do. She tried to strike a deal. She told the mysterious assassin that she'd drink his poison, but if she survived, he had to help her escape and live. It was a fair trade, in her opinion. Sitting here and waiting to be executed wasn't exactly a retirement plan. The man asked if she really thought she could survive outside. After all, she wasn't just anyone. She was the evil witch Giselle Roseven, a name loathed throughout the Empire. Even if she escaped, there'd be wanted posters everywhere. Her family was gone, her allies non-existent. Whether she died here or out there didn't make much difference. Giselle huffed. What a pessimist. Sure, she had her fair share of enemies, an entire world full of them actually, but even so, she refused to believe she'd run out of options. Somewhere out there had to be a place that would take her in. And if all the so-called good people decided she was too evil to keep around, then fine. She'd just go find work with someone equally wicked. At least villains didn't pretend to be saints. That little spark of defiance seemed to amuse the mysterious man more. He gave her one of those laughs that sounded both entertained and curious. He wondered if she already had someone in mind for this villainous employment. And of course Giselle, never one to back down from a dramatic declaration, claimed she did. The funny thing was, she only sort of remembered who it was. The main villain of the novel world, obviously. But her memory always chose the worst times to fail her. Thankfully, her companion seemed more than happy to help, casually supplying the name Wayne Ayore. That instantly clicked. Giselle recognized it the moment she heard it. The most dangerous man in this world, and precisely the type she needed on her side. Before she could dig into how her mysterious visitor happened to know the final boss of this story, another hooded figure stormed in, his movements frantic but determined. What made it worse was the sound of metal clinking. A key. He had the key to her prison cell. Clearly the guards were either bribed, stupid, or both. The assassin spat curses, screaming about vengeance for his fiancée as he lunged with a dagger. Giselle barely had time to react before she twisted aside at the last second. Without hesitation, she uncorked the vial and swallowed it in one go, flung the empty bottle away, then turned toward the shadows and called for the mysterious man she'd been dealing with. She had done her part. She drank the poison. Now it was his turn to keep his end of the bargain. However, he hadn't technically promised anything. He'd only said he'd consider it. A small but rather annoying difference. Still, her boldness seemed to amuse him enough that he decided to act anyway. With a snap of his fingers, the air around them changed. Dark mana rolled through the cell like a living storm. The assassin froze mid-step as black shadows coiled around him, dragging him into a depthless void before he could even scream. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. Giselle turned slowly, eyes widening as she finally got a proper look at the one who had saved her. The mysterious man was no longer just a shadowy voice in the dark. She couldn't help but question the logic of it all. Wasn't the whole point of being an assassin to stay hidden? Yet here he was, unmasked, confident, and unfairly good-looking. The kind of handsome that practically screamed trouble. He crouched down and picked up the empty vial from the ground, inspecting it with quiet interest. For a brief moment, Giselle's imagination ran wild. What if he was another idiot planning to test the poison himself? Every assassin before him had tried that stunt, as if watching her survive somehow made them immune too. Thankfully, this one wasn't suicidal. He was not only handsome, but miraculously intelligent. He had no intention of tasting the poison and even admitted it was extremely deadly. Giselle almost teared up in relief. Finally, an assassin with more than half a brain. Then, he smiled and snapped his fingers. A glowing magic circle appeared beneath their feet, symbols whirling in dark light. Giselle's thoughts spiraled fast. Magic user? Check. Familiar with dark energy? Double check. That meant only one thing. This man had to be connected to Wayne Ayore, the infamous leader of the Dark Mages. In a blink, the prison cell vanished. The next thing she knew, she was standing in a dimly lit alleyway. Freedom, at last. The man seemed amused by the surroundings, casually remarking on how shabby the place was for someone of noble birth like her. Giselle didn't even care. She was just relieved to be breathing non-prison air. He leaned closer, clearly enjoying her flustered reaction, before jokingly suggesting he could always return her to her cozy little prison. Giselle instantly dismissed the idea, which only seemed to amuse him further. Any sense of relief, however, was short-lived. The man explained that her escape wouldn't stay a secret for long. The use of dark magic would be reported, and soon enough, half the empire would be after her, execution orders and bounty posters included. Giselle felt her fleeting excitement sink. So, she was free, but also one wrong step away from becoming public enemy number one. Still, her mind quickly shifted to something more intriguing. In the original novel, dark magic had always been portrayed as the villain's power, the kind of force the protagonist feared and condemned. Wayne Iori, the final boss, had been the figure who unified all dark mages into a single terrifying faction called the Black Clouds. Their rise had always been foreshadowed by a chilling phrase: "The Black Clouds are rolling in." Putting two and two together, Giselle couldn't help but suspect that this man standing before her was part of that organization. Maybe even one of Wayne's top men. Wanting confirmation, she cautiously asked if he was a dark mage, and perhaps a member of the Black Clouds. The man's only response was a small, knowing smile, one that revealed nothing yet said everything. As silence settled between them, Giselle could only cringe inwardly at the memory of her earlier bravado. She had actually declared, rather proudly, that she'd get herself hired by the final boss. And now, she might have said that in front of one of his men. Stressed and still catching her breath, Giselle finally gathered the courage to ask the mysterious man for his name. He introduced himself as Reniel, but that name didn't ring a single bell. Her confusion only deepened as she studied him more closely. Red eyes and black hair. A strikingly handsome face that could make any woman's knees buckle. But hold on, there wasn't a single person in the novel with red eyes and black hair. The final boss had silver hair, for crying out loud. So who exactly was this man supposed to be? She couldn't help but think that he looked far too hot to be some forgettable background character. He had that kind of dangerous charm that main characters usually had, yet no one by his name existed in the story. After mulling it over, she concluded that he must not be that important to the story. Besides, all the members of the Black Clouds have the tendency to act on their own anyway. The original Giselle had once teamed up with a dark mage, so this man was likely another one of those independent, shady types who operated alone and got recruited like her as well. Trying not to look suspicious, Giselle decided to come clean about one thing. She hadn't actually met his boss yet. Reniel didn't seem bothered. He merely brushed it off, and even assured her that he wouldn't report anything bad about her to the boss. Then, as if it were no big deal, Reniel casually mentioned that they weren't actually far from the prison cell she'd just escaped from. In fact, they were still close enough for the guards to find them at any moment. Giselle's eyes widened in disbelief. He didn't even teleport them farther away. What was the point of all that dramatic escape if they were still basically in the prison's backyard? With no other options, she decided to sweet-talk her way out of it. Maybe if she played nice, he'd stick around a bit longer. After all, fate, or whatever twisted sense of humor this world had clearly brought them together. But Reniel wasn't easily swayed. He teased that he didn't work for free, and even joked about waiting until a bounty was placed on her head so he could collect it later. However, before she could even come up with a clever retort, the distant sound of guards shouting echoed through the area. They were closing in fast. Panic set in, and she quickly tried to bribe him with information, claiming she could offer him a secret that would earn him a fast promotion. Her confidence returned as she realized she had the upper hand. She knew this world's future. She said she knew the fates of certain important individuals, and even hinted that she was aware of what would happen to his boss. Of course, he didn't believe her right away. Who would? So she blurted out the first half-convincing thing that came to mind, that after drinking so many poisons, she somehow gained mysterious powers. Naturally, Reniel remained skeptical. He never heard of anyone gaining magic abilities from drinking poison. Desperate to convince him, she quickly clarified it wasn't magic but possession. She then explained that some unknown entity had entered her body because of the poison, granting her knowledge that no one else knew. That seemed to do the trick. It finally caught Reniel's attention. Then, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. Fortunately, the guards passed right by them, completely unaware of their presence. Giselle instinctively clung to Reniel's shirt, begging him not to leave her behind. That's when he finally decided to tell her the truth. Apparently, the original Giselle had tried performing a forbidden ritual right before her arrest. And the worst part? She'd attempted to gain power by sacrificing the very dark mage she'd been working with. Reniel's tone was calm but sharp as he explained that even dark magic had rules. Certain lines simply weren't meant to be crossed. That's why he was there, to clean up the mess left behind by the foolish dark mage who'd died after being tricked by the so-called evil witch. His main goal was to check if the forbidden ritual had actually worked, and if it had, to take whatever remained and study it himself. Reniel suddenly reached out and seized her hand. Then he murmured something about the ritual, the fall of a star. According to him, that forbidden ritual involved summoning a being from beyond that world. The very reason the evil witch performed it was to harness its power. The problem? The ritual wasn't perfected, and the risk of being consumed by whatever was summoned was nearly certain. He looked straight into her eyes, and his next question sent a chill down her spine. Who are you, really? There was no way she would confess who she really was, so she forced herself to stand firm and claim that she was Giselle. Not that he believed her anyway. But now, it all made sense. The chilling truth settled in. She hadn't come to this world by accident. The original Giselle had summoned her. All she could do was cry internally, wondering why Giselle had chosen her. Of all people, why summon an overworked, ordinary, innocent office worker like her? Reniel continued his interrogation, pressing her for details about which important figures would survive in the future and her real identity. Carefully choosing her words, she gave the safest answer she could think. Well, I'm Giselle and I'll definitely survive. To her dismay, that only seemed to make Reniel more intrigued. He assumed she was trying to bargain. But then, his tone turned cold, as he reminded her that there were other ways to extract information, like a prison cell built by dark mages. The implication was clear enough. At that point, Giselle felt less like a person, and more like a small chick cornered by a predator who was deciding whether to toy with her or dissect her for research. Panicking, she blurted out that she genuinely valued her life and that threats weren't necessary. She'd cooperate. Reniel, meanwhile, merely observed her trembling figure, thinking how the real Giselle he knew would never act so pitiful. Still, he decided to give her a chance, to offer him something more valuable than the bounty on her head. The problem was, Giselle didn't have much to offer. The only skill she could think of was her bizarre ability to tell poisons apart by taste. At first, Reniel laughed, calling it disappointing. But his amusement faded the moment she confidently added that his boss was going to die from poisoning. Then, with confidence, she declared that she could serve as the strongest villain's official poison taster. Reniel didn't say much after her bold offer, but the fact that she was still breathing was already a small miracle. Instead of turning her in, or selling her to the highest bidder, he simply decided to take her somewhere to work. Her new workplace turned out to be a gloomy, eerie shop filled with cursed objects, jars of strange liquids, and at least one doll that looked like it wanted to murder someone. Giselle quickly realized she might have just traded one kind of death sentence for another. From the moment she arrived, she was on high alert. She even suspected that Reniel's true plan was to finish her off with a curse, since poisons didn't work on her. However, Reniel assured her that she wouldn't be cursed just because the shop sold cursed items. He also made it clear that since he didn't trust her yet, she'd have to work there first and prove her worth. Her job, apparently, was to sort poisons and attend to the rare customers who wandered in. When she hesitantly asked if that meant labeling bottles, Reniel's smirk said it all. She was the one who bragged about being a poison taster, so now she'd have to live up to it, literally. She was to taste them and identify what each one did. Truly, the universe had a dark sense of humor. It's already been 10 days, and Giselle had somehow survived her new internship. Reniel had supervised her during the first few days, but had disappeared 3 days ago without warning. With nothing to do but wait, she began talking to the terrifying doll beside her out of sheer boredom. Its name was Isabel. Just then, a man named Ten showed up, lifting boxes with his usual grin. He worked odd jobs around the place, lifting heavy things or basically doing anything that could help him earn his way into becoming an official dark mage. Giselle, of course, didn't understand how moving boxes was a step toward mastering dark magic, but maybe the logic of dark mages was just different. Ten wasted no time teasing her, saying she shouldn't be naming the cursed doll herself, unless crazy Miss Giselle truly had something wrong with her head. The nickname stuck like glue. No matter how much she glared or denied it, he only grinned wider, pointing out that truly mad people never realize they're mad. To make matters worse, he even added that she was crazy in a good way, which didn't help her pride one bit. Still, Giselle's curiosity got the better of her. She asked why the store kept receiving new boxes when they barely had any customers. In all her days there, she'd only seen a few shady figures come and go, but no one had actually bought anything. Ten just shrugged, saying people did buy things sometimes, before handing her that day's poison sample. One sniff was enough to make her gag. It reeked like the durian fruit. The problem? Ten was utterly confused because the poison was supposed to be odorless. It was then that she finally realized she could detect poisons that others couldn't, by both smell and taste. Reniel had already pointed it out before, noting that all the poisons she had been given were meant to be tasteless and odorless, but this moment confirmed it once again. After finishing his errand, Ten waved her goodbye with his usual cheerful grin, calling her Crazy Miss Giselle one last time before heading out. This time she didn't even bother to correct him. Left alone again in that shop, Giselle sighed. She had originally stayed put because she didn't want to provoke Reniel, but now that he'd been gone for days, a dangerous idea crept into her mind. This might be her one chance to escape. If she stayed, who knew what Reniel might decide to do next? After all, the man was terrifying and unpredictable. So she made up her mind. Quietly, she grabbed one bottle of poison and bag of money as payment for her 10 miserable days of labor and tiptoed toward the exit. To her relief, there weren't any magical traps or cursed seals blocking the way. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped outside. Giselle bolted as fast as she could. Freedom was within reach. She just needed a wagon to make a clean getaway. As luck would have it, she remembered a customer at the shop mentioning one. Just as she was about to put her plan into action, something she definitely didn't want to see appeared before her. Slamming on her mental brakes, she assessed the situation. A whole squad of knights patrolling the street. And they weren't just taking a casual stroll. They were looking for someone. Sneaking closer, Giselle noticed the wanted posters plastered on the walls. Her face stared back at her from every single one. Panic hit her like a ton of bricks. Of all the places to work, she had unknowingly been stationed right next to a guard's post. Then, the sensation of someone standing behind her sent shivers down her spine. Before she could react, a familiar voice whispered in her ear, asking why she was just standing there. Turning slowly, she prayed it wasn't who she thought it was. Unfortunately for her, it was Reniel. "If you take a few more steps, you'll walk straight into them," he said, looking like he had all the patience of a cat watching a mouse make bad life decisions. Giselle immediately switched to survival mode. With her best innocent expression, she cheerfully greeted him. "Wow, long time no see, boss." And his response? "It's been 3 days." Yikes, he wasn't buying it. She quickly backpedaled, explaining that this wasn't an escape attempt at all. No, it was just her daily 10,000-step walk for better health. Exercise is important, you know. Reniel stared at her, grinning. Then, after a pause, he casually pointed out that she had also taken poison with her. Giselle's heart stopped. How did he know? Was he spying on her with magic? Thinking fast, she blurted, "Oh well, small doses of poison really boost productivity." However, Reniel wasn't done. "And the bag of money? Do you usually need cash to go on a walk?" She put on her best innocent face and declared that she had planned to buy her Master Reniel a gift for saving her. With a smirk, Reniel feigned belief, clearly entertained by her attempt to dig herself out of this hole. Then came the worst part. Guards were heading right toward them. Thinking fast, Giselle yanked Reniel's cloak and buried her face in it. Her master plan? Fake a romantic moment to make the guards too embarrassed to approach them. Reniel, however, wasn't convinced. "You really think a back alley kiss is going to fool them?" Before she could argue back, he suddenly leaned in, pressing her against the wall. He seemed more interested in charming her than simply helping, using the pretext of couple acting. The tension skyrocketed when one of the guards locked eyes with her. She started smacking Reniel, hoping he'd fully commit to the act. But just as she braced for disaster, the guards walked right past them. Bewildered, she asked him what just happened. After a few steps, he finally stopped and casually pointed out where the wall ended. And just like that, he dropped the truth. It had all been an illusion spell. They weren't invisible to each other, but to everyone else. Totally gone. Giselle immediately thought back to the story. In the book, magic always left a trace. Magic circles, weird residue, and dark magic even came with a creepy aura. That's how the main leads had tracked down Wayne and almost beaten him. Maybe she just remembered it wrong. So she asked Reniel why the guards couldn't sense the spell. He answered very casually that it was obvious. He was more powerful. Giselle plopped onto the ground like someone had kicked her soul out, asking why he hadn't told her sooner. Turns out, he had been letting her squirm for fun, because she looked cute, a little dumb, and it amused him. She couldn't even freak out over that revelation, because he suddenly suggested they head back to the shop. And just like that, her so-called escape plan vanished from her mind. She now felt like a tiny, helpless chick, totally at the mercy of a cunning cat. Tentatively, she asked if going back meant he planned to torture her. He just smiled and said he could, if she wanted. They didn't even have to go far. He could do it right there. She sprang up, instantly switching into full employee mode. Saluted, announced that a new poison had arrived that day, and declared that his loyal, hard-working temp would immediately return to the shop to inspect it. And then she bolted. He laughed at her antics, finding her completely entertaining. Back at the shop, Giselle shuffled nervously over to Reniel and handed him the chart she'd been working on, the one cataloging all the different poisons she'd sampled over the past 10 days. Reniel skimmed through it and couldn't help but notice how easy it was to read. She'd done a surprisingly thorough job sorting through all those poisons, and for a moment, he thought about how Pedro, his personal aide, would probably flip if Giselle was working in his office. Giselle, completely unaware of his thoughts, kept rambling about the poisons, insisting that no matter how impossible it sounded, every single one had a fruity taste. She tried to sound serious, but Reniel was lost in his own thoughts, quietly amused. He couldn't picture Giselle performing some forbidden ritual just to improve at office work. And knowing her, she would never grovel or act unnaturally either. The idea was so ridiculous it made him laugh. What on earth had that evil witch even summon inside her body? He remembered how she used to cower at even the tiniest pain. Yet here she was, willingly drinking poison without a hint of fear. She didn't want to be in danger, but she also didn't mind working under a villain. Contradictory? Absolutely, but that made her fascinating. Reniel wanted to see what lay beneath all that bravado, what truly drove her. So he asked her directly, testing whether she would finally reveal her real name. Of course she didn't. Just like before, she held on to the name Giselle Rosevan. Normally scaredy cat, but she turned strangely stubborn whenever he pressed the question. She looked exactly like Giselle, but the behavior? Completely different. In the end, Reniel let it slide, deciding to just call her Giselle. She sighed and asked if the chart had finally proven she was useful. Reniel admitted it. Yeah, her skills were impressive, but he also said he still didn't trust her. That answer hit her like emotional damage. She started complaining, saying she was probably the most harmless person he'd ever meet in his entire villain career. Reniel didn't budge. He said he had trust issues, and on top of that, he'd literally caught her trying to run away earlier, with money. Giselle slowly shrank in place but still tried to defend herself. Same weak excuse about just taking a walk. Except this time she added that the money was her advance monthly salary. And then he stayed silent. That silence said everything. Reality smacked her in the face. He never planned to pay her at all. Her switch flipped instantly. She went off, ranting about how hard she worked, how she functioned like a machine, how she literally risked her life drinking poison every day, only to get exploited like cheap labor. The frustration just poured out of her in one long, emotional spiral. Reniel just chuckled. Watching her chirp angrily like a tiny, furious chick only made him more convinced she wasn't the real Giselle. The real one wouldn't act like this. This one was loud, expressive, dramatic, and weirdly adorable. At this point, he even understood why some dark mages never used chicks in hexes, because honestly, they were just too cute to kill. Then he started using magic. That alone almost gave Giselle a heart attack. Her anger instantly deflated. At this point, she didn't even care about wages anymore. Food and shelter sounded amazing. Being alive sounded even better. She just didn't want to die over a paycheck dispute. Her panic only made Reniel laugh harder. And then 2 glowing butterflies appeared. They were beautiful, floating calmly in the air. His familiars. And now they were assigned to watch her. Giselle immediately felt better, because at least she had something to talk to. Until Reniel mentioned they could only talk to him. She pouted like a kid who just got told the puppy doesn't belong to her. She was happily admiring them, right up until she found out the red butterfly could poison her, and the white one could paralyze someone with its stinger. That information should have terrified her. But since she's immune to poison anyway, she just accepted them as new companions like cool murder butterflies, but still cute. Meanwhile, Reniel remembered something she had said before, about knowing the fates of important people. He started wondering who she meant, and if Wayne was one of them. So he asked how much she knew about Wayne, and why she kept insisting on working for him. Giselle answered simply, because Wayne was the strongest villain. A fair logic. Then she asked him to pass a message to Wayne, or the big boss, about how grateful she'd be for a job. In her mind, working for the main villain meant stable income, job security, and basically the fantasy version of landing a position in a massive corporation. For her, that was the dream. However, Reniel pointed out a problem. What was the point of becoming Wayne's poison taster if she was the only one who could tell them apart? Why even keep a chart? And how long did she plan to go on drinking poison? Giselle had an answer ready. She said she'd taste everything Wayne ate first, like old court ladies who tested royal food. Then, with sparkling eyes, she asked if Reniel could arrange a meeting with the big boss. His answer was a flat no. Being Wayne's food taster meant being glued to him nonstop, and that was exactly why Reniel refused to introduce her. He turned to leave and told her to just focus on running the shop instead. He even promised to pay her monthly. Her eyes lit up instantly, then dimmed just as fast when he added it wouldn't happen until she became a full-time employee. That's when Giselle stopped him. She stepped forward with a serious face. For a second, Reniel actually thought she was about to do something dangerous. Maybe this whole silly act was a cover. Maybe she wanted to get close to Wayne to assassinate him. With that thought, he summoned the butterflies, ready for an attack. But instead of violence, she demanded an employment contract. A real one with clear training period and salary amount to avoid future disputes. Then she turned around, went straight to the counter, and drafted the contract herself at lightning speed. Just like that, Reniel burst out laughing, clutching his stomach. In his mind, whatever that evil witch had summoned into her body, this was still the best thing she'd ever done. Giselle had no idea why he was laughing, but the result mattered more than the reaction. By the end of it all, she secured a confirmed job contract. Once Reniel's familiar started watching Giselle, he showed up even less than before. But thanks to that, she actually got more free time and was able to take short walks every now and then. Of course, she didn't mind having those 2 beautiful butterflies spying on her. In fact, she felt much more at ease taking walks with them. Plus, it was a good way to prove to her boss that she had no intention of running away. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and Ten walked in, greeting Giselle with his usual cheerful grin as he called out, "Crazy Miss Giselle." Instead of being annoyed, she proudly told him that she wasn't a temp anymore, but an official trainee, so he should start calling her Trainee Giselle from now on. Ten gave her a thumbs up, teasing that she'd gone even crazier these past few days. Giselle simply smiled. At this point, there was no use caring about what Ten called her. After all, she'd signed an official contract. The fact that her training period and official employment date had been set probably meant Reniel wouldn't hand her over to the guards or experiment on her anymore, right? In other words, this contract didn't just guarantee her employment, it guaranteed her survival. Ten then said he was actually there to buy something, specifically Isabel, the cursed doll. So Giselle told him to just grab the doll himself. Nervously, Ten asked whether Isabel had ever cursed anyone who touched her, as he carefully lifted the doll by its clothes. For a dark mage apprentice, Ten was kind of a scaredy cat. She smiled, and explained that their shop was where cursed items were sold, not where people got cursed. Relieved, Ten thanked her, handed over his payment, and walked out of the store. Now that Isabel was gone, she felt a bit lonely. That's when the two butterflies showed up, making Giselle realize she still had these two beautiful familiars. She recalled how the dark aura that had emanated from Reniel's fingertips must have been dark magic. It felt different from the dark aura he used in the jail cell to swallow up that last assassin. This time, it almost sparkled. Maybe his magic was flashy to match his looks. As she started settling into her new role, a very upset man stormed into the shop, slammed his hand on the counter, and demanded to know whether she was the convict on death row that Master Reniel had taken in as a cashier. A little confused, Giselle tried her best to explain that she didn't even know about being taken in. But Reniel had given her the job. The man cried out in frustration as he complained that the job was supposed to be his, and he was furious that Giselle had taken his place. Not that Giselle even understood what was so special about being a cashier there. She tried to calm him down, while he demanded to know where Reniel was. She said that the boss didn't give any information, and that she hardly saw him. But if he left his contact info, she promised to give it to Reniel. But the guy wasn't having it. He didn't want to trust a former death row convict. Irritated, Giselle made it clear that she would rather be called a fugitive than that. Besides, she wasn't on death row anymore and didn't intend to die anytime soon. Before things could escalate further, Ten barged in after hearing the noise. At the sight of a witness, the angry man immediately bolted, promising to return. Giselle could only sit there thinking, what kind of nonsense was that? Later on, Giselle found herself sitting in the same alley where the illusion magic had been cast before. It felt like the safest outside spot she could get. She knew she couldn't walk around freely. Her face was still on wanted posters, but staying inside the shop all day was slowly driving her crazy too. She needed air. While sitting there, she started thinking things through. The original Giselle didn't really matter in the story anymore. That role was basically done. As long as she stayed cooped up in the shop, she shouldn't bump into the main characters. Reniel already said he wouldn't introduce her to Wayne, so the main villain path was also blocked. And yes, staying as a shopkeeper was her best survival plan. If she had to deal with another nightmare customer, she'd just ask Reniel for another creepy doll like Isabel and keep it by the counter as a guard. Problem solved. Then the butterflies started flapping like crazy in front of her face. Both familiars were suddenly way too excited. Giselle stared at them, wondering if they were trying to communicate. Since she couldn't understand magical butterflies, her brain jumped to the dumbest conclusion possible. Maybe they're mating? The butterflies flapped even harder. If looks could kill, she would have died on the spot. Whatever they were doing, it was very clear she was very wrong. While she was still trying to figure out their weird behavior, something else caught her eye. A tall figure stood out among the guards. Actually, not just tall, buff, like armor can't hide that buff. Blonde hair, green eyes, glowing hero energy, full knight in shining armor vibes. He looked straight out of a fantasy poster. Her brain immediately went, poisonous apple male lead. Then it hit her. That's Dylan. And the panic came instantly. Why was he here? And then, as if the universe wanted to make things worse, his gaze met hers. Without thinking, Giselle grabbed her chair and sprinted back into the shop like her life depended on it. Because it did. Illusion magic didn't work on him. His special eyes could see through everything. This man was basically anti-plot armor. She slammed the door shut, locked it, chained it, bolted it, and mentally considered boarding up the windows too. This shop is closed. Permanently. So, please go away. Her heart was racing like crazy. In the novel, Dylan was supposed to return to his territory after Giselle's execution. And that's when the horrible thought hit her. If he hasn't left yet, then that means her execution is still on the table. And if he saw her, he would absolutely turn her in. No hesitation or mercy. Just straight to the authorities. So she immediately ordered the familiars to call Reniel. This was not a handle-it-alone situation. This was a call-the-villain-boss-right-now situation. Then she heard noise outside. Someone was trying to get in. Probably a very stubborn male lead. The chains, locks, and the door did their job. The shop was officially not accepting customers, heroes, or executions. Giselle covered her mouth, barely breathing, scared that even the sound of her lungs working would give her away. Time felt painfully slow. When the noise finally stopped, she let out a shaky breath. But one thing felt very real in her chest. Dylan wasn't going to let this go and stop until her execution was done properly. Still, she tried to calm herself. She was just a minor character. Why would a main hero chase her this hard? Then she remembered. In the original story, Giselle threatened the female lead's life. So yeah, hunting her down actually made perfect sense. She sighed, trying to convince herself that maybe it wasn't Dylan at the door. Maybe it was just another weird villain customer. Or maybe she overreacted and just panicked for nothing. That hope didn't feel very convincing. But with nothing else she could do, she waited. The next morning, Giselle unlocked the shop door with shaky hands and fake confidence, trying to convince herself that today would be normal. It lasted about 5 seconds, because of course someone was already standing outside asking why the shop was closed. It's crazy customer guy. The same dude who was yelling not too long ago was suddenly way too chill. He said he had a delivery for Reniel and asked if he was inside. Giselle just shrugged. She hadn't seen Reniel in a while, which was weird, especially since supplies were still showing up like clockwork. But before she could think too hard about that, the man smoothly shifted the topic and asked for her help instead. Since Reniel wasn't there, she could just handle the delivery. The goods were in a carriage parked on the main road, too big to fit into the alley. He explained that the carriage was blocking the view from the street, so they could move the goods quickly without anyone seeing into the alley. That sentence alone should have triggered every danger alarm in her brain. Giselle didn't like the idea of going near the road at all, so she tried to decline politely. Sorry, can't help energy. The man immediately pushed back. He said he had other deliveries to make and no time to waste. And if she didn't help, he'd make sure Reniel knew his employee wasn't cooperative. That hit her where it hurt. She was just a trainee. Bad reviews could end her job before it even started. So, against her better judgment, she put on her cloak and followed him, already planning her escape route. Grab the goods, run back, lock the door, stay inside forever. Just like he said, the carriage blocked the view from the road. No guards nearby, people watching or witnesses. Everything about it felt wrong. He told her to climb in and push the crate toward him. He'd receive it from outside. She tried to argue. He was the delivery man. This was literally his job. He brushed it off, saying she couldn't handle the weight and might drop the goods. And since he'd have to pay for damages, this was the best option. She didn't like it, but she didn't have a choice. Inside the carriage, there were multiple crates stacked together. No labels or markings. Nothing helpful. She picked the lower crate like he instructed, already annoyed that nothing was organized. As she reached for it, a cold voice stopped her, and then a sword touched her neck. It was Dylan. Her blood ran cold. Turns out the delivery man had sold her out. He'd made a deal with Dylan and immediately started asking about his payment, bounty money and a wiped criminal record. Business transaction. Villainous trafficking edition. Dylan answered calmly, saying that since the man helped capture a criminal like Giselle, he would consider the request. That was all Giselle needed to hear. She glared at the man who betrayed her, eyes full of fury and disbelief. With one sharp shout from Dylan, the carriage suddenly lurched forward. Giselle lost her balance and tumbled backward inside, crates rattling around her like a bad action scene. Dylan kept his sword aimed at her the whole time, not even blinking. Panicking, she went straight into playing dumb, insisting there had to be some kind of mistake. She was just a normal girl getting threatened with a sword in a delivery carriage. Totally reasonable misunderstanding, right? He scoffed. There was no version of reality where he believed she was innocent. So Giselle switched tactics. She nervously said people always told her she looked like the evil witch, and maybe he'd just mistaken her for that woman. Nope, he wasn't buying it for a second. He stared at her and said her acting had gotten better. He already knew she had summoned an evil being into her own body. That sentence hit like a truck. She snapped and shouted that she wasn't evil, that anyone could see she had a perfectly virtuous soul. Zero darkness or demon energy. Just fear, stress, and unpaid labor trauma. Dylan didn't care. He calmly guessed it was either a side effect of forbidden magic, or she'd been swallowed whole by a demon. Either way, the ending was the same. She was going to die. At this point, Giselle seriously wondered if this man had a split personality. In the novel, Dylan was kind, gentle, soft-spoken, and respectful to the female lead. This version? Pure psycho energy. When she asked if they were heading to the execution grounds, he confirmed it, but added that he planned to purge the demon inside her first. And that's when her brain screamed. There was a scene like that in the novel. A dark mage who made a contract with a demon, burned alive with light magic in public execution. That memory alone nearly made her soul leave her body. Desperate, she pointed at him and snapped back, calling him the real demon. She basically turned the logic on him, shouting that anyone watching would see who the real monster was. Her, an innocent girl helping move a crate, or him, a man who lured someone into a trap just to burn her alive. Dylan dismissed it as nonsense. So she fired back harder, yelling that for someone who could see the true nature of things, he couldn't even recognize an innocent person standing right in front of him. That line hit something. His expression shifted. And suddenly, his hand was around her neck. He demanded to know how she knew about his ability. Giselle couldn't even answer, because, hello, it's really hard to explain when you're being choked. Her vision blurred, but one clear thought ran through her head. If this is how she dies, she's absolutely coming back as a ghost, and she's haunting him first. Just then, a soft green glow wrapped around Dylan's hand. He couldn't even react, because magic dust started raining down on him from above. The butterflies. They were glowing and sprinkling magic like tiny floating alarm systems. At least that distraction worked. Dylan released Giselle and snapped his attention upward. One fast slash later, both butterflies were cut down and vanished in the air like sparks. He turned back to Giselle, unimpressed, calling it a cheap trick, already ready to strike again. But suddenly Magic Circle appeared between them. Seconds later, black aura surged up like living smoke and slammed straight into him. He tried to block it, but this wasn't like the familiars. This magic didn't fade. It didn't break. It kept coming. While he was busy defending from the front, he didn't notice the second attack. Dark energy wrapped around him from behind like shadowy tentacles and yanked him clean out of the moving carriage. Giselle watched him fly straight into the ground. As she stood there, too stunned to process what had just happened, a familiar voice snapped her out of it, telling her she'd fall off just like Dylan if she stayed frozen like that. It was her boss. She stumbled backward, and she nearly did fall, but his very solid chest stopped her. Once she realized who it was, panic mode activated again. She rushed to explain everything at once. She wasn't trying to escape, she didn't kill the butterflies, she didn't betray anyone, she didn't do anything wrong. He already knew. So instead, he asked if she had anything else she wanted to say, while placing his cloak around her. Totally confused, Giselle ended up apologizing for something random, like leaving the shop unattended. Not exactly the response Reniel was expecting. Then it hit her. She hadn't even thanked him yet, and so she did. She also added that since the familiars saved her first, she felt like she should thank them. When she asked if he had ordered them to protect her, he said not really. That made her think the butterflies acted on their own, and that Reniel was low-key stealing credit. She didn't say it, but her face did. Reniel read it instantly and asked if she had any idea how hard it is to teleport onto a moving carriage. That shut her up. Eventually, she responded with the most robotic thank you ever recorded. Just pure auto-response. Then she asked about the butterflies, if they were actually destroyed. Reniel teased her, saying he told them to watch her, and now they were dead. Of course, she immediately blamed everything to Dylan. From his reaction, she figured out the truth anyway. The butterflies were fine. If he showed up right after they were cut down, then their death was probably the signal. Which led her to the next question. She asked if Dylan was dead. Reniel joked back, asking if she wanted to make sure he was dead. But Giselle said no, saying Dylan wasn't supposed to die like this. Someone else was meant to kill him. Smirking, Reniel remarked how strange it was to hear her talk about Dylan like he was a stranger, especially since he'd heard rumors that she was head over heels for him. That made Giselle panic, She tried to remember how the real Giselle acted around Dylan. Oh, right. It was an embarrassingly one-sided crush. She used to call him things like my love and my darling. With no choice, Giselle awkwardly said, "What do you mean? My darling isn't a stranger. I can't stand him getting hurt. Even now I'm so worried about him that my heart aches," coughing between her words as she visibly cringed at her own performance. Reniel finally stopped teasing and turned around, saying they were heading back. He snapped his fingers, and moments later they were back inside their shop. Once back, Reniel immediately told her to stop goofing around and start packing. They were moving. Giselle blinked, still processing the sudden mood swing. But of course there was a reason. Dylan had discovered their location. They needed to leave before he came knocking again. Reniel seemed certain that Dylan had survived. And honestly, Giselle agreed. Main characters like him never die that easily. As she packed up the cursed objects, which she touched unwillingly, she couldn't help wondering if Dylan would come chasing after her again once he recovered. Then she asked the practical question. How on earth were they supposed to move everything? Reniel just said he'd handle it with magic. And sure enough, he opened a bottle with red liquid on it and began drawing a magic circle on the floor. While watching him, Giselle suddenly remembered that traitor, the man who had sold her out to Dylan. She admitted she hadn't followed her darling willingly. She'd been tricked. Reniel said he already knew. His familiars had seen everything and reported back the moment she was captured. Giselle, now annoyed, assumed that meant he'd just watched the whole ordeal until she was practically strangled. Her irritation was written all over her face. But then, he smiled wickedly and asked if she wanted to know what happened to the man who tricked her. As he wiped red liquid from his hands, she trembled and immediately said no. When he gestured for her to come closer, she hesitated, half expecting him to show her something gruesome. Instead, he gently inspected the bruise on her neck, his expression genuinely concerned. Trying to lighten the mood, Giselle joked that at least she only got bruised and not burned alive. Then she started ranting about Dylan. How insane he was, talking about purging the demon inside her when he was the one acting like a demon. Reniel listened with an encouraging smile, telling her to keep going, until Giselle suddenly remembered she was supposed to be in love with Dylan and fell silent mid-rant. Grinning, he asked if she wouldn't be sad if Dylan got hurt. Then, as if warning her, he added that she should stop calling him disgusting pet names like my darling. All she could manage was a shaky, sure. In her mind, Giselle figured Reniel's irritation came from rivalry. After all, Reniel worked under the main villain, and Dylan was basically the big boss's rival. Oh no, he was just obviously jealous. Anyway, once the magic circle was complete, Reniel pulled her close. A flash of light later, they arrived at their new spacious shop. But then Reniel suddenly staggered, his body leaning against the door as if the teleportation had drained him completely. Panicked, Giselle rushed forward, asking if he was all right. He brushed it off and gestured toward the room. It would be hers from now on. His voice was firm but exhausted. He told her they'd keep the shop closed until everything was unpacked and that she should rest. Before she could protest, he turned and shut the door behind her. Left alone, Giselle sighed deeply. He'd clearly burned through a lot of mana to teleport the entire shop. Hopefully he'd be fine after some rest. Collapsing onto her bed, Giselle mentally replayed everything that had happened that day. At one point, she genuinely thought she was going to die, and she had never been so terrified in her life. One thing was certain, though. She couldn't afford to let her guard down again. From now on, sticking close to Reniel sounded like the smartest decision she'd ever make. Over on the other side of the story, the Black Cloud members were busy welcoming Wayne. They updated him on the preparations he had ordered, confidently saying everything was set. If things went as planned, the Knights wouldn't notice a thing. Pedro greeted Wayne next and leaned in to whisper something to him. Whatever it wasn't small talk. Wayne's expression shifted immediately. He turned and left with Pedro on the spot. Before going, he gave quick orders to his men, reminding them that the teleportation circle better be ready soon. The two moved fast, heading straight for a luxurious mansion. When the doors opened, they were welcomed by Reniel, not as a shady shop owner, but as the real big boss behind everything. The moment he saw them, He didn't bother with greetings and went straight to the point and asked if they had found the man. Wayne's answer was less than satisfying. Dylan wasn't dead. Reniel's disappointment was palpable. He had clearly hoped for a different outcome. Pedro noticed right away that Reniel wasn't looking his best. Sweat beaded on his face, and his complexion seemed off. Apparently, he had moved the entire store by himself, without using any magic items or the aid of mages, while normally, he would use either for such large-scale teleportation, all because of an unexpected appearance from Dylan. Both Pedro and Wayne questioned why Dylan, who should have already left the city, was still there, and how he had managed to find the shop's new location. They hinted that there might be a spy among them. The final boss commanded them to move all their forces out of the city that very night, warning that he wouldn't hesitate to kick them out of the black clouds if they dawdled and got caught by Dylan. He then ordered Wayne to head to the city walls and start an assembly to distract Dylan for a while. Pedro, ever the curious one, couldn't help but ask why Reniel had brought Giselle with him. He coolly replied that she was his employee. Pedro's eyebrows shot up. A wanted criminal as an employee? That wasn't exactly normal. Unbothered, he explained that she was still in her 1-month training period. He even added with a soft laugh that they could call her Crazy Giselle, since that was her nickname. Now left alone, Reniel remained seated in silence. He asked the 2 butterflies if Giselle was already asleep, and they confirmed it. Still uneasy about how carefree she had been acting after everything that happened, he decided to check on her. Lacking enough power to use his usual snapcast magic, he opened a teleportation gate instead. When he arrived, the sight immediately told him everything. Scattered items everywhere, products piled up, and clear signs of chaos from the shop's sudden relocation. It was obvious Giselle had a lot to reorganize. He quietly noted it to himself. He'd need to find people to help her soon. Then he entered on her room. Reniel instructed the butterflies to stay where they were and watch over Giselle until she woke up. She must never die, at any cost. Looking at her beautiful face, he gently brushed a stray lock of hair aside and softly whispered her name. His voice warm and tender, as if afraid even his breath might disturb her. He had managed to avoid conflict with Dylan until now, but everything began to unravel the moment Giselle was captured. Reniel questioned whether it was truly worth risking his life for her. Under his breath, he murmured, "I suppose I'll just have to wait and see, but until then, I'll keep you by my side." Meanwhile, things were far from calm on Dylan's side. He had been gravely wounded after his encounter with Reniel and Giselle. A woman beside him used her light magic to treat his injuries. At last, the heroine of the poisoned apple, Viviana Charlotte, finished healing him, and Dylan expressed his thanks. Viviana, however, thought his gratitude was unnecessary. She simply believed it was her duty to help as a saint. Then, Dylan mentioned that the Wicked Witch had once again joined forces with the Black Mage and suggested that Viviana return to his estate for her own safety. Viviana quickly refused, insisting she needed to stay and assist him. But Dylan reminded her that Giselle had nearly killed her multiple times before, and he couldn't risk that happening again. Viviana, however, insisted on remaining. She mentioned that she had heard rumors of Giselle changing, softening perhaps, but Dylan firmly believed otherwise. In his mind, Giselle hadn't changed at all. If anything, she had completely lost her sanity. Still, Viviana felt that Giselle deserved at least a chance at forgiveness from God. She added that if Giselle truly had changed, she might even be able to purify her. Dylan immediately countered that there was only one way to purify a soul tainted by dark magic, by destroying it completely with purifying fire. Besides, he was deeply concerned that Viviana might end up in danger once more. To him, Giselle was a wicked woman who had long since lost her right to reach heaven. Viviana, he said, shouldn't waste her compassion on someone like her. Yet Viviana couldn't help but feel sympathy for Giselle. Dylan turned away, replying that Giselle wasn't someone to be pitied and that he would personally take care of her. Since Dylan clearly wasn't going to change his mind, Viviana simply asked him to at least be careful. Just as he was about to leave, Viviana mentioned Reniel and asked if he had heard anything about him. Dylan paused briefly, then admitted that he honestly hadn't heard anything. Not wanting to drag the conversation out, he quietly left the room and returned to his duties. The next morning, the lights were already shining bright in the newly relocated cursed items store. Giselle could hardly believe her eyes. Standing right in front of her were several villains straight out of the novel. The first to chat with her was Sullivan, a drug researcher and doctor known for testing his experiments on humans. He looked like a boy, but that was deceiving. Apparently, he'd taken the wrong medicine as a child, which halted his growth entirely. In truth, Sullivan was already an old man. In the original story, he was eventually caught conducting experiments on Viviana and decapitated by Dylan. If Giselle's memory served her right, the swordsman standing behind him was Gilbert, Wayne's personal guard. She remembered him as the serious and loyal type. His black magic was average, but his swordsmanship? Absolutely top tier. Next came Windria, a middle-aged woman who stood calmly beside them, reliable and sharp. Giselle knew that Windria and Pedro were both Wayne's second-in-command. In the original plot, she was both a necromancer and a curse caster. Giselle felt like she'd accidentally stumbled into some kind of villain fan meeting. Sullivan remarked that he'd heard she was a little crazy, and honestly, after talking to her, he could see why. Giselle immediately denied it, of course. Still, how on earth did these people get inside a store that was supposed to be closed? Before she could question it, another man arrived, Pedro, who also owned that building. He asked Giselle to confirm that she really was employed at this store, mentioning that her probation period lasted 1 month. Giselle was shocked he knew that detail, but nodded anyway. Then Pedro casually asked if it was true that Reniel had nicknamed her Crazy Giselle. At that, Giselle nearly lost it. She wanted to strangle Reniel and take back every word of gratitude she'd ever muttered about him. She quickly clarified that she preferred just Giselle, thank you very much, not Crazy Giselle. Naturally, one of the villains immediately teased her by calling her exactly that. Our poor heroine was struggling not to blow a fuse. Whispers passed between Gilbert and Windria. They were both convinced she was genuinely losing it. Sullivan even joked that she must have taken the wrong medicine and nodded to himself as if that explained everything. And just like that, the nickname Crazy Giselle stuck. At this point, she had no choice but to go along with it. Soon after, they all introduced themselves properly. Turns out, Pedro had gathered everyone to help organize the shop. To her surprise, the villains were actually quite helpful. When she asked Pedro to contact their boss, and quickly corrected herself to say Reniel, he informed her that Reniel was dealing with urgent matters and wouldn't be back soon. He also added rather kindly that Reniel had told him she was delicate and easily frightened, which was why she avoided cursed items altogether. Hence, Pedro had called in reinforcements. Giselle wondered, this was definitely not the ruthless villain crew she expected. Were they really evil, or just emotionally unstable? After a while, the shop was clean, snacks were shared, and the group was chatting like old pals. Sullivan mentioned that his clinic was located above Windria's lab, just a short walk from Gilbert's place. Giselle thought it was adorable. Like a villain neighborhood watch. A true villain den, as she called it. Then Sullivan noticed the faint bruises on her neck. He sighed, regretting he didn't have the right medicine with him. Windria guessed they might be from a curse, but Giselle brushed it off, insisting it wasn't serious. Gilbert, however, wasn't convinced. He frowned and said they looked like marks left by nasty light magic. Gilbert explained that light magic was poisonous to dark magic users. The two forces naturally repelled one another. Giselle, however, wasn't a mage, so why was it affecting her? Sullivan clarified. Mana and magic power were similar, but not the same. Knights like Dylan used mana through training, while mages were born with magic power. Giselle realized that maybe that's why Viviana was able to help Dylan in the original story, because light magic aligned closely with mana. Windria added that Giselle's body had been tainted by black magic after making a deal with a black mage. That was why light magic had now harmed her. Desperate to steer the conversation away, Giselle stood up to grab more snacks, but as she passed by a mirror, she caught sight of her bruises again. Sullivan, ever blunt, commented that Dylan must have been a savage to strangle someone. He added that anyone close to a light mage was basically trash anyway. How could he be so rough with a woman who's already gone crazy? Giselle could only laugh awkwardly, mentally asking him to stop calling her crazy. Windria nodded. reminding everyone that no dark mage had ever survived an encounter with Dylan. Technically, Giselle was lucky to still be breathing. Sullivan agreed, saying Dylan was a terrifying enemy to all dark mages, and bet that his blood was probably blue, joking that he'd love to get a sample of it someday. Soon enough, Windria and Sullivan started bickering about which of them would die first, Sullivan or Dylan. Out of nowhere, Gilbert approached Giselle again and handed her the strangely ominous orb, explaining that she should throw it at Dylan for protection. Giselle, however, was more concerned about the price of the cursed item she was holding. Sullivan chimed in that it was best for her to have something to defend herself with. After all, Dylan was notorious for never letting go of his targets. She recalled that the male lead she knew from the novel was all about justice, so surely Dylan would keep coming after her. Then it hit her. She'd made a huge mistake by mentioning his powers earlier. Dylan's top-secret ability wasn't revealed until halfway through the novel, and now that she knew his secret, he'd definitely come after her. But Windria reassured her not to worry. If Dylan showed up, they wouldn't just sit around. Giselle was part of their team now, which meant no more flying solo. Giselle didn't want to put them in danger, though, so she insisted she could handle things herself. Windria, ever the wise one, patted her head and reminded her that when adults offer help, she should just say thank you. Windria also joked that Sullivan could hardly be counted as an adult, despite his real age. Feeling unexpectedly emotional, Giselle teared up. The villains panicked, thinking something was seriously wrong, but she quickly reassured them everything was fine. It was just that no one had ever offered to protect her before. She'd always had to do everything on her own. Sullivan cursed Dylan, saying he couldn't believe that the once evil witch Giselle had turned so soft because of that man. Then, trying to lighten the mood, he reminded her that with Gilbert around, they had nothing to fear. He even promised to give her the privilege of hiding in the back room of his own clinic. Feeling a bit calmer, Giselle looked down at the cursed object again. Suddenly, surrounded by these oddball villains, cursed things didn't seem so dangerous anymore. After some time, when Giselle was alone in the store, she tried to compose herself. This new world, and meeting Dylan, had shaken her, but she decided she would never let herself fall apart again. Taking a deep breath, she shouted at the top of her lungs that it was time to open the shop and start making money, trying to cheer herself up. Just then, Reniel's voice startled her from behind, nearly giving her a heart attack. He had snuck up so quietly that she hadn't noticed him at all. He commented that she was too clueless to sense his presence, adding that Sullivan, Windria, and Gilbert had all noticed him right away. Giselle quickly shot back that she was different from them. He laughed softly, saying that judging by how loud she was being, like a chirping chick, she seemed to have recovered already. Giselle admitted that unpacking hadn't taken long, and that she had been resting in her room ever since. Then she cautiously asked her boss if he was all right. After all, Reniel still looked pale. Changing the topic, he mentioned that he'd heard she cried. He teased that the villain's words about protecting her had probably moved her, which she quickly and awkwardly denied. Reniel then reminded her that when he saved her, she'd only thanked him begrudgingly, teasingly asking why she would cry over others' promises when she hadn't even cried for him. Giselle, flustered but sincere, admitted that she was actually most grateful to Reniel. He was pleased to hear it. Then, he did something completely unexpected. He tied a yellow scarf around her neck, gently covering her bruises. The scarf was beautiful, and it perfectly hid her marks. Reniel explained that it was just a temporary fix and promised to bring her something better next time. After that, he walked off casually, telling her to get ready. Giselle had no idea where or why they were going, and she certainly wasn't sure how she could leave the store unattended. But it seemed Reniel had other plans. He was taking her on a tour of Van Hell, the villain's territory. It's the most bustling area of the city. You can find a store selling fresh fruit, the biggest candy shop around, and a sausage vendor that totally makes Giselle drool. However, is it really okay for villains to walk around so casually like that? Don't worry. Van Hell is a place where only criminals can enter. In fact, there's one strict rule that everyone here must follow. If someone causes a big scene, they're immediately banished. Simple as that. That's why people in this city don't really pay much attention to each other. Giselle finally understood why their shop was on such a busy street. It was, after all, the home base of Chief Wayne Ayore. Hearing this, Reniel casually asked her to come clean and tell him how much she actually knew about Wayne. Giselle replied that she only knew about as much as the other members of Dark Cloud, but she did know that Wayne was a dashing man with striking silver hair. Suddenly, her stomach growls loudly, and Reniel bursts out laughing. It's already lunchtime, so the two of them decide to find a nice place to eat. Giselle happily digs into her food while Reniel just smiles, clearly entertained by how much she's enjoying herself. After finishing their meal, the two leave the restaurant feeling satisfied. She feels overjoyed to finally be able to walk around freely again. Beaming, Giselle declares that Van Hel is now her second hometown. Reniel can't help but be captivated by her radiant smile. Then, out of nowhere, a fast-moving carriage came barreling past them. But Reniel reacted instantly, pulling Giselle out of the way. While she was busy calming her racing heart, he remarked that if she had gotten hit by a carriage here, it would have actually been her own fault. Strange, but that's just how Van Hel law works. What would happen if Giselle made a fuss after getting hit? Well, even though making a scene is frowned upon in Van Hel, she could still create a mess a little if she wanted to. She'd just have to keep it low-key so no one notices. In short, violence was the key. But it had to be done quietly and without a trace or evidence. Just by looking at Reniel's ominous expression, Giselle quickly decided that staying in the store was probably her safest option after all. Hearing that, Reniel casually suggested that Giselle should bring Gilbert with her whenever she goes out from now on. That instantly made her curious. She asked if he meant the man she knew as the big boss's bodyguard. Reniel paused and asked if that was how Gilbert introduced himself. But she said no. So Reniel simply assumed it was just another one of those strange, only Giselle knows this, bits of information she had been talking about since day one. Giselle pouted, and Reniel laughed at the expression. He explained that Gilbert answers directly to the big boss, so of course he'd protect her if ordered to. Reniel obviously meant himself. Giselle, however, very confidently thought he meant Wayne. So she went ahead and asked if Wayne personally told Gilbert to watch over her, or if the boss himself wanted to see her at the shop. That question hit Reniel out of nowhere. He stared at her and asked if she was really that eager to see Wayne. And Giselle? She didn't even try to hide it. Wayne was rumored to be insanely handsome, like fantasy-level hottie, elite visuals and full villain CEO energy. Reniel mumbled that the rumors were actually true, face heating up. But Giselle misunderstood it completely. In her mind, Reniel just looked irritated because he was scared of losing a good employee to Wayne. So she assumed it was jealousy over staff, not looks. Then she kept going. She started praising the big boss, talking about his shiny silver hair, the kind of face you remember after one glance, the kind of visuals that live rent-free in your brain forever. Reniel tried his hardest not to react, looking away to hide his blushing face. Then Giselle casually asked if Reniel could arrange a meeting, since the big boss already knew about her anyway. She added that she'd never seen someone with silver hair before, and really wanted to. Trying to sound normal, he asked if she really liked silver hair that much. She blushed and admitted that yeah, she thought it was cool and fascinating. Then Reniel quietly asked, "What about black hair?" With that, Giselle misunderstood the vibe completely and gasped, asking if he was jealous of the chief's looks. Now Reniel had a headache. He shot back, asking why she kept idolizing someone she didn't even know, calling her way too easy to impress. But when she asked if that meant the boss wasn't handsome, Reniel said no, he is handsome. That was the final straw. Giselle stomped away, pouting like a child who lost an argument she didn't even understand. Reniel just stood there, mentally exhausted, wondering how a single conversation turned in that way. And as he watched her walk off, he recalled their first conversation. So he asks Giselle if she truly knows the future of some important people she talks about, then directly inquires about Dylan's fate. Giselle answers honestly, yes, she knows what happens to him. The shocking revelation? Dylan will die, and the one who will deliver the final blow is none other than Wayne Iore. A wicked smile spreads across Reniel's face, beautiful, yet disturbingly pleased. He just can't contain his delight for even a second.